Not only are you staying green, but you're making more money. Caterpillar estimates that remanufacturing an engine produces 61% less greenhouse gas compared with making a new one, and generally requires about 80% less water, energy, landfill space, and raw materials, because you're rebuilding it. You're not throwing it out. Remanufactured engines are sent to dealers, which can be used as part of a comprehensive rebuild. In other words, they can rebuild the whole backhoe, just not the engine. Increased shipping costs and transportation delays have made receiving used engines and sending out remanufactured versions more expensive and more difficult during the pandemic. Now, the cost, according to Mr. Edwards, the cost benefit of using already produced iron has already helped keep the process worthwhile at Caterpillar. After a construction company operates an excavator for its useful working life, it's typically cheaper to pay a Caterpillar dealer to rebuild the machine and use remanufactured parts instead of buying new ones, according to Jeff Whiteman, president of Empire Southwest, Caterpillar's dealer in Arizona. Now, last year, Empire Southwest purchased 22,000 remanufactured parts and engines from Caterpillar. Workers at Empire disassemble and rebuild a completed machine using a combination of cleaned, new, and remanufactured parts, depending on the availability and the cost of the products. As manufacturers grapple with supply chain problems, rebuilt equipment and remanufactured parts have allowed customers to get their machines back into safer or faster service. It goes back to providing the lowest cost of ownership, says Mr. Whiteman. That's the whole thing in a nutshell. If you can make the money, then it's worthwhile. Remanufacturing is the new green. That's something we've learned during the pandemic. You're having problems getting with your supply chain? Fine. Don't bring it all in new. Rebuild what you have. The other thing we learned from the pandemic, you can work remotely. Now, what do you mean by working remotely? Working remotely, working from home, sometimes it's the same thing, sometimes it's not. Working remotely simply means you're not in the office. You're not at your employer's place. You're someplace else. Doing the same job, just not at the desk at world headquarters, okay? Now think about it. If you had your choice, would you rather live in New York City or Miami, Florida? Folks, I've been to both and they're not even close. New York, while it's kind of exciting, the big buildings are cool and there's a lot of hustle and bustle, it's dirty, it's crowded, it's very, very expensive. Miami, it's cool with a capital C. There is not a cooler place in the world than Miami. To me, anyway. So, why am I even going there? Because Miami locals are steamed. They're upset because New Yorkers are moving to Miami, working remotely, and driving up the costs. In fact, apartment rents have soared 58% in the Miami area over the past 2 years. In some cases, doubled over the last year. That's the cool places, all right? Now, check this out. And you think your rent is high? The two-bedroom apartment that Natalia Soler shared with her roommate for 2 years is doubling in rent from $3,500 a month to $7,000 in 1 year. Now, Natalia Soler moved to a 49-story luxury tower in Miami's Brickell neighborhood 2 years ago. Very cool neighborhood. She and her roommate paid $3,300 a month for a two-bedroom apartment in a building with an Equinox fitness club, rooftop pool, and a 24-hour concierge service. Sweet digs, even for Miami. Now, she renewed the following year for $3,500. Okay, so it went up $200, no big deal. But when her lease expired earlier this year, the landlord delivered some shocking news. He was doubling the rent to $7,000 a month. Now, Ms. Soler looked at other apartments in the building, but every two-bedroom condo available for rent was going for $6,000 to $7,000. She had just finished her $3,500 lease. Now, even with a recent pay raise from the law firm that she works for as a paralegal, she couldn't afford these prices. She's moving out of the building. They're getting pushed out by these people who aren't native Miamians, Ms. Soler said. It's happening with everyone I know that's renting. Now, Miami area apartment rents have soared 58% over the last 2 years through March, the fastest rate of any U.S. metro area. That's according to Realtor.com. Now, that compares with a 19% average national rental increase over that period for the rest of the country. So why Miami, okay? Now, some in Miami's most desirable neighborhoods, like Brickell, Edgewater, and downtown, rents have surged much more than that. For at least a dozen high-end buildings in these hotspots, individual condo owners leasing their apartments have asked for rents at double last year's price. Double! Again, that's according to real estate agents and tenants. Now, those quantum leaps reflect the recent migration of so many finance and technology professionals pouring into Miami. They're drawn by Florida's year-round warm weather, lower taxes, and what newcomers say is a more business-friendly environment than places like California or New York City. Now, many of these new Miami residents have high-paying jobs, and they're used to significantly higher rents than inexpensive West Coast and Northeast cities, making even the steepest Miami rents seem reasonable. Case in point, Sammy Mancini. He's one of the new Miami transplants. Her previous apartment was a Manhattan East Village neighborhood where she lived in a tiny little shoebox with 2 friends. In 2021, Ms. Mancini quit her job, found another New York-based job that allowed her to work remotely. So she moved to Miami this year. Ms. Mancini says, "My friends would tell me how much they were paying for their apartments, and I thought, wow, that's nothing compared to what I was paying in New York City." The New York City's East Village, she and 2 of her friends squeezed a 3rd bedroom into their apartment by putting up a temporary wall in a living room. Ms. Mancini split the $6,000 rent and paid $2,000 for a bedroom that barely fit her bed. So for $2,000 a month, she got barely a place to sleep. Now she's living in her own luxury unit with floor-to-floor ceiling windows and 2 pool decks. Her luxury 1-bedroom apartment in the Brickell neighborhood rented for $2,600, though those same units today go for an upwards of $4,000. So for basically the same thing, she got a lot more. Now her real estate agent, Alex Marks, who's also a transplant from New York, he works at a financial technology company based out of Paris and leases apartments on the side because the business has become so lucrative. His first apartment, 2 bedrooms on the 40th floor with water views in the Brickell neighborhood, went for $2,800 when he first arrived. It's now renting at $6,500 a month. Everyone's like, when's it going to break? When's the bubble going to pop? Mr. Marks said. I truthfully think this is the new Miami. Bidding wars for Miami homes for sale have become commonplace over the past year. Now these competitions are breaking out among renters. To secure an apartment in the most sought-after neighborhoods, tenants offer anywhere from $200 and $500 above the monthly asking rent, while some even agree to pay 1 year's rent in advance. Anything that was listed, the price was fictitious. Anything would come in much higher than asking, said Carlos Cortez, a Miami local who was priced out of downtown. He also went up against tenants willing to write a check for 12 months' rent. Mr. Cortez said he tried to move to the Brickell area, but he was outbid twice by people who offered to pay an entire year up front. So they have the money and the cash. Instead, he moved into the Edgewater neighborhood, which is a bit further from his office, by offering $300 above asking price himself and paying for 4 months in advance. So he played the game. Many companies relocating to Miami are also paying a full year's rent for their employees. That's according to Elliot Machado, a broker associate with One Sotheby's International, who represents condo owners renting units. He said he saw this practice among tech and finance firms in Chicago, California, and the Northeast. He also saw individual New Yorkers pay rentals a year in advance while they searched for a property to buy in Miami. Now, Miami unit owners are aware of the recent influx of well-heeled out-of-state renters. Many figure, why not double the asking price and see what happens, according to Mr. Machado. Every landlord wants to swing for the fences, he said, but they don't always hit it out of the park. Sometimes, like in the Biscayne Bay area, a renter was asking for $5,000. Nobody was taken, so he had to lower it to $4,500. Now, soaring rents are painful for natives like Francesca Levy-Neighbors. Her and her husband grew up in South Florida. After she earned her master's degree from New York University and her husband from Harvard Law School, they moved back to Miami to be near family. When they moved from the Northeast, they had a Miami apartment on the 26th floor of a luxury building with a water view. But after moving out over the weekend, they settled for a third-floor apartment with views of a storage facility. That's what it is like in Miami now. People want to live in Miami because it costs less. Sure, it's a lot more beautiful, but it costs less. And employers understand that they can pay them a little bit less because they're living in a place that costs a little bit less. Everything is relative. Absolutely everything. So let's take it to the next step. The third story out of the Wall Street Journal in today's essay has to do with working remotely again. And so if you work remotely, we've established that you can work for a New York City firm, but live in Miami, where it's cheaper and it's cooler. Now check out this twist to that idea. Tech industry representatives are coming to Capitol Hill this week to warn of the remote work trend that will lead to more offshoring of software developer and other technology jobs unless the U.S. admits more high-skilled immigrants. Now, remote jobs in the tech industries jumped more than 420% between January 2020 and last month. Growth was intensified by the pandemic. That's according to a job data review by Tecna. Tecna is a trade group for regional tech consuls. Now, in February, more than 22% of all tech jobs were listed as working remote, compared to 4% in January 2020. So 22% of all tech workers work remotely. Okay? What does remotely mean? It means you don't work in the home office, you work someplace else. Now, remotely just doesn't mean you work for a New York firm and you live in Miami. What about work for a New York firm and live in Mumbai or Manila? Now, the level of remote tech positions that are open is drastically higher than it was during the pandemic. That's according to Jennifer Grundy-Young. She's Tecna's chief executive officer. That means workers can live anywhere in the U.S., but it also, unfortunately, opens the door to more outsourcing. Workers staying in India, staying in China, or moving to places like Canada that have more flexible immigration policies. Now, why don't they just bring the people into the U.S.? Because the U.S. allows 65,000 skilled worker visas annually under its H-1B program, plus another 20,000 for people who hold graduate degrees from American universities. Those numbers haven't budged since 2005, despite the sharp rise in tech jobs. Now, in contrast, Canada, which has been courting tech workers for years, has no cap on visa for immigrating tech workers or entrepreneurs, making it an attractive destination for Indian, Chinese, and Eastern European computer coders, software engineers, and other tech workers who have a hard time obtaining a U.S. visa. Now, Toronto added more than 81,000 tech jobs since 2016, more than any other city in North America. That, according to a report published last year by CBRE Group, a U.S. commercial real estate services and investment firm. Now, the U.S. employment rate for tech occupations was 1.3% as of March, lowest level since June 2019, and about one-third of the national unemployment rate. So it's almost nothing.